Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and welcome to our session, Making Sustainability Education Part of the DNA of Universities. Can we prove it? My name is Estela Castelli Florina Peltz. I work as account manager at Sulitest, and together with my incredible team, we've put together this event, which marks a transformative milestone in the Sulitest history. And that's because we have a very special announcement at the end of the session, so make sure you stay until the end. Today, we'll start with a brief global overview on measuring performance in higher education by Jean-Christophe Carteron, president and co-founder of Sulitest. We will then have our first roundtable discussing assessment as a system change lever. Rankings, ratings, and accreditation bodies have a significant influence and therefore responsibility in guiding the academic sector. So today we will discuss with a few leading organizations about how to use this lever in a world that is crossing planetary boundaries, failing to meet basic social needs, and begging for change. We would then discuss with representatives of universities of how they are moving from having a few brilliant but sometimes isolated and niche actions to having a true deep DNA transformation that is aligned with sustainability. So we're going to look into what has enabled the systemic transformation, the people, the concrete actions, the levers, the obstacles, and the inspiring stories, and the insightful indicators that allowed that to happen. And we will close with our very special announcement by Aurélia Descamps, co-founder of the Sulitest movement. Without further ado, JC, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Estela. I will just try to share my screen. Does it work? Can you see my screen? Okay, thank you. Thanks, Estela, and welcome all of you. So, as Estela mentioned, before we begin our two roundtable, we'd like to give you a brief summary of how we measure sustainable performance in higher education. And to start with, I think it's important, first of all, to know why we measure things in any kind of organization. In higher ed, like any organization, we need to define strategy. So measuring allows us to understand and decide, of course, what is important and what is less important, and to be able to prioritize what we are going to implement. Once we have defined our strategy, of course, measuring obviously allows us to manage it and checking what are the results of our action and if they match or not with what we plan. And of course, we also measure to report and to prove what we claim. What is important to know at that point, it's in any case, it's measuring is never neutral. It could be at the level of a state, at the level of a company, or even within an organization. Measurement has always a political scope because it's ultimately reveals what is important in a system. So when we look into higher ed, the first question, of course, is to agree on the scope of responsibility for this organization. So I will go very quickly on this, but to make it simple, like any organization, university have a social, environmental, and economic responsibility. They use resources, they produce waste, they are more or less good in inclusivity, for instance. But in addition of that, higher ed institutions have also their own responsibility, which is, of course, to ensure that all their graduates will be able to make responsible decisions. So if we go now at the level of an establishment, we have several types of measures which can be taken. The first, the most global, will cover the entire institution, the whole institution approach, including governance, research, pedagogy, the green and social management of your campus. And we will ensure that all institutions have integrated the notion of sustainability into their culture, into their strategy, or even in their governance. We can measure, for instance, what has been done in terms of recruitment or training of the faculty, for instance, which is quite interesting. We can look, of course, at in the way how research is organized. We can measure the means implemented or the impact of the research. So Are there some chairs or research projects? Do we have a kind of a particular organization for research? Or we can, of course, calculate the number of academic papers on a specific sustainable topic, or the number of publication, which will be for anyone, like in a magazine, for instance, to eliminate the knowledge to the greatest number. At the institutional level, we can also look at the capacity of an institution to put extra financial indicators for the campus. For instance, they can have a target on CO2 or on non-discrimination. And we will also find people who will measure the social and environmental aspect for the campus. If we go to the level of the program, we can look at different pedagogical approaches that have been implemented. Of course, the content. Are there mandatory or optional course on sustainability? We can also measure what the university is doing to encourage young people to get involved in the field and not only in the classroom. So if we go then we can also look at what is done in each courses and how a professor of marketing, finance, or even biology integrates sustainable development in his or her course. And finally, we must be able to go to the level of any individual and to be able to measure the knowledge, the skills, and the mindset for the students. So we are lucky today to have organizations that are actually acting at different levels. We are going to have an accrediting bodies that works in the business school world. In the world of ranking, we have, of course, the conventional ranking, which are gradually trying to add sustainable development into their own system. And we have also some ranking that have been built specifically around sustainable development. And we are lucky enough tonight to have one of them with us. And if we go to the level of the program, we will need shortly about one of the, I just put all the logo, one from Label Educ. And there are, of course, label on the social environmental management of the campus. We won't talk about that tonight. They are really most of the time specific to a country where the campus are based. And to help faculty to integrate sustainable development into their course, there have been very nice initiatives carried out by SDSN with GLI, with John and UNEP, which have been made, they have made a matrix to allow each faculty member, for instance, to evaluate himself and to measure the integration of the SDG into his or her course. And finally, if we go down further, the students will have experience a lot of things in his curriculum or her curriculum into the course, and of course outside of the course. And at this end, they will live with a certain level of knowledge. And if sustainability knowledge is important to you, we must assess it. So we cannot forget these indicators. And at this level, there are some projects like the one that we are carrying out at Sulitest, which Aurélien will talk to you about later, and whose goal is to measure the knowledge that any students should have on the major challenges that on the planet. So thank you for your attention. And I give the floor to Estela. Thank you.
Thank you, JC. I'd like to invite our first roundtable, which will be discussing assessment as a system change lever. For this, I'd like to welcome our moderator, Kathleen Ng. Kat has been an active supporter of the Sulitest movement for years and of the task force in the last few months. She's also the senior advisor working in strategic initiatives at McGill University, and she is working with Hezi as the working group leader of the working group in rating, ranking, and assessment. So Kat, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Estella and Jean-Christophe. It's been really, really great working with you, and I'm excited to be here to talk about some of our work. So we recognized that HESI a few years ago that ratings, rankings, and assessment were really, really important. You know, the influence that they have on academic institutions and how can we influence rating, rankings, and assessment organizations to do better as part of the HESI work. So I'm very excited to have our panelists here today. We have Piet Naudet, we have Duncan Ross, we have Karina Hopper, and we have Gérald Vidal, who are joining us today. So I invite each of us to, each of you to do a brief introduction of yourself, your pronouns if you'd like, and what you're currently doing in this space, just to kick us off. So let me start with Karina.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Karina Hopper. I am a sustainability lecturer as well as co-founder of the EDUC label. The EDUC label is the first international sustainability certification for higher education degree programs of all types and disciplines that are committed to bringing sustainability.
Boa tarde.
Perhaps everyone could mute their mics. Thank you. For all types of higher education degree programs that are committed to bringing sustainability learning to their students. So the EDUC label is granted for 3 years, and it consists of a framework of 100 plus yes or no and quantitative questions, all of which serve as guidelines for good practices, as well as a student survey to gauge immediate impact and an alumni survey, which we use to measure impact over time.
That's super exciting, Karina. Thank you for sharing. Next, we can go with Piet.
Thank you, Kathleen and Karina and all the colleagues on the panel. First time I see you, great to have you. My name is Piet Naudet. I'm recently from South Africa. I was Dean of the Stellenbosch Business School, and by the way, professionally the Professor of Ethics. So the kind of questions that we addressed today was very much part of my academic career. I am now linked to the quality services of the European Foundation for Management Development, the well-known EFMD. We've got about 960 business schools and faculties around the world, really global now. It's grown from a European base much wider. And we do two things around sustainability. One is, we'll talk a bit later about that, is a high-level accreditation of schools, either as a whole school, Kathleen, but also we have also program accreditation, where you can put forward a specific program, an MBA or a Bachelor in Finance, where we then evaluate as part of the standards whether the ethics, responsibility, and sustainability are duly reflected. And we've upgraded our standards. We've now made it very much a compulsory part. It's no longer just, a footnote. It has to be there. You will not be accredited for the full term unless you can demonstrate that. And then secondly, we do preparatory work. So we have professional services where we assist business schools and work with them to help them embed, for instance, sustainable development goals throughout the mission, the vision, the programs of the school. And I'm also involved with EDAF, which is a preparatory service that we provide on the way to accreditation. And then we also look into the issues of sustainability as well. So EFMD broadly, very well known. I think we're one of the, aspired accreditations in the world. EQUIS is a very good label, and we've really upped our game to make sure that sustainability is embedded. We'll talk a bit later about that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Piet. And it's very exciting work. I think John and others from the HESI working group on ratings, rankings, and assessment may have already been in touch, perhaps to talk about how we can highlight some of the work that you are doing at EFMD for accreditation agencies, and how we can build out to other disciplinary associations and accreditation agencies to learn from that experience and move it forward. And speaking of the ratings, rankings, and assessment group, we have Duncan here. So Duncan, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you very much, Kathleen. My name's Duncan Ross. I'm the Chief Data Officer for Times Higher Education. Times Higher Education started in 1971 as part of Rupert Murdoch's empire. It wasn't his then. As a magazine, looking at the higher education sector, mainly in the UK at the time, but now globally. We have since departed Rupert's world. And in 2004, we started to publish our university rankings. But they're very much focused, or they were very much focused on research-intensive universities. And like many rankings, it was essentially a kind of state of play of the nation. This is what the world is, rather than deliberately trying to change things. But there's no doubt that rankings do focus what universities do. They change that focus. They give, either intentionally or unintentionally, incentives. So in 2019, we decided that actually we needed to step into the sustainability space, and I created a new ranking, the impact rankings, that has 17 distinct rankings, one for each sustainable development goal, plus an overall ranking. And the aim there is very explicitly to both record good practice, but also encourage better practice. And I think that's really important. And it's not perfect. By no means is it perfect. It gets things wrong, but hopefully it encourages universities to think about how they are delivering on sustainability, because universities have a key role to play here. 1.7% of gross world product is in the higher education sector. Just looking at the economic impact of universities alone tells us that they need to be part of the solution. And in the last 4 years, we've grown that ranking from 0, from a standing start, to now having 1,524 universities from 110 different countries and regions, global north and global south. So that's what we've been doing. We're also starting to do many more events targeting universities, and we will be running our first SDG Congress in Glasgow this November, 1 year on from COP26, where we hope to bring together universities, but also NGOs, governments, and companies to see how we can build partnerships for sustainability in the future.
Thank you so much, Duncan. And it's always exciting to talk to you. And it's really hard to imagine all this work that we started in 2019 has really ballooned out to, spread to things like accreditation, to, just working together to improve what we currently have with regards to the ratings, rankings, and assessments that we have currently, building out new ones, working with other organizations like UNESCO on the Transforming Education Summit, and trying to, again, leverage the work and the interest that's happening in the community, and just collaborating to build forward, because we've only got 7.5 more years. Yes, and then it's great to have you on board on the HESI roundtable, as well as JC on Sulitest, and I want to invite Gérald to also speak a little bit to your role, your work in this space as another member of the Sulitest task force. So go ahead, Gérald.
Thank you, Kathleen. Hello to everybody. My name is Gérard Vidal. I work in Lyon in the French Institute of Education, which is part of the École Normale Supérieure de Lyon. Our institution is conducting fundamental research on many themes, and also research on education. And one of our roles is to provide teachers training, and as that we are trying to develop research on the way of the teachers can teach. And of course, sustainability is one of the major problems, because sustainability has entered most of the programs, whatever discipline, whatever level. And most of the teachers are not very equipped to teach and transmit notions on sustainability and on climate change and on all those questions. We have a second problem, that is to see what the students can learn and when they can learn something interesting. And that's why we started a project to link meteorology to climate change, and try to see if it was a good step to enter by meteorology to reach climate change, and then understand what are the questions on sustainability. So I am the leader of a project that tries to at the same time provide some resources for the teachers to teach meteorology, and then try to develop some research on how they will try to transfer notions and knowledge on sustainability. Then our questions are double. One is how to train the teachers, of course, and also how to train the students. That's it.
No, and thank you so much, Gérald. And that's really critical work, because this is training the trainers to train the leaders of the future. So it's a critical leverage point that we can move together on to try and ensure that the leaders of the future are teaching the ideas and the values that are necessary for the future we want for everyone on the planet. So yes, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And while we're on this note, I just wanted to kick off the roundtable of questions. So Gérard was speaking about programs at the school with regards to sustainability. I'd like to invite Karina. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the EDUC label and how this was born. Where are you at? What's the scope? How do you check the data, and how to make sure that this kind of programmatic activity is actually happening on the ground?
Absolutely, thank you. Yes, so the EDUC label began in 2020 when my co-founder Joanna Wagner and I wanted to do a research paper actually together on the gap between the skills and competencies that were being taught by higher education programs and what was needed in the workforce. And we went out to set about finding this information and found out that there was very little transparency on what was actually being taught in higher education programs. And there was very little evidence to back up what programs were saying was being done. So students themselves were having trouble, as we could see, finding this information, of course, if we couldn't, even as researchers, gather this information in an efficient way. So we thought a certification could be the answer here in terms of measurement, providing programs, higher education degree programs, with a means for measurement and ultimately for impact measurement as well. So we partnered in the very beginning with AFNOR, which is the ISO representative member of France, and we went through the process of creating a certification. This is what we've been working on for the past year and a half, 2 years. And it started with an expert working group. So we had people from EdTech, from teaching, from curriculum design, as well as, for example, a recent graduate who had been fighting for sustainability integration in his higher education programs and was sensitive to the topic. Following that, we went through a stakeholder consultation with 25 plus global experts in education for sustainability in different sectors. And we're currently now in the piloting phase. So if you haven't heard of the EDUC label, it's because it hasn't launched commercially yet. It will be launching at the end of this year. And so you'll be hearing a lot more from us very soon. I don't know if we have time for me to continue with some of your other points, or maybe we give someone else the floor. Would you like me to move on to the scope now?
You could speak a little bit about the scope, because I think this actually is going to relate to some of the questions I'm going to ask our other panelists.
Okay, excellent. So the EDUC label, as I said earlier in my introduction, applies to degree programs of all types and disciplines anywhere in the world. It is a digital label, so no need for on-site audits. And we are looking at program level in part because what we could see from JC's map in the beginning about the different areas of measurement in an institution, we have partners who are already doing a very good job at the campus level, at the institutional level. But we felt that there was a need to go deep into the program level because that's where the teaching is happening, the student learning experience is taking place. And there, at the moment, there was a need there. We also felt that students really choose their school based on the program that they want to enter, and they're comparing programs globally. So when we started, we saw a need for impact measurement after talking to many stakeholders. And that's when we get to the point of one of the biggest missions of the EDUC label is to gather that data through alumni questionnaires. So with the alumni that graduate from the program, we want to see how has that education for sustainability affected them. And we look at that through indicators such as our graduates who had some training in sustainability. Thanks to that training, are they then doing things like maybe joining the UN Global Compact? Maybe they're introducing codes of ethics into the workplace. So what can we see as evidence of the positive impact of this education for sustainability?
Thank you so much, Karina. And that's really exciting work that you're doing. So I'm going to turn it over to Piet because it's kind of related with regards to, the work that you're doing at EFMD and, the new grid that you have put together. If you could just speak a little bit about that and the story, some of the challenges and the trends that you're seeing that are going to be critical moving forward, things like these new labeling, how that could play into the new grid, et cetera.
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen, and thank you very much for the insights from the other panelists. I make notes as I go along, always open to learn new things. Let me say the EFMD around about 2013 realized, Kathleen, that if we are accrediting quality, that quality should be related to the realities which business people face. You can't, be in management education, but you're blind to the realities of management. And as investors and clients and the broader public started to demand from business to show their sustainability, we obviously at that time started to introduce it. The difficult question was, do you embed it just right through everything, or do you make it a standalone standard or criterion? And it's a difficult one. I personally believe from an academic perspective that the mature approach is not to have sustainability as a separate entity. It must be embedded in everything, but you can't start there. So we chose for almost a double route. So we've created a special standard called ERS, Ethic, Responsibility and Sustainability, but we expect that standard to reflect back on your strategy, on your programs, on your faculty, on your internationalization, on the kind of students you produce, on the type of research that you do, and obviously on your relationship with practice. So I think we made a good choice. And this very year, 2022, we've redefined some of those categories to make it a little bit clearer. So it is now impossible to get an EQUIS or a program accreditation from the EFMD unless you are able to demonstrate ERS in the broader sense. What were the trends that we picked up? It might be interesting. I think the first trend was that it's not too difficult to change your strategy because you can rewrite your vision, your mission to include sustainability and so forth. It's a different story to move from that. And that is where our previous speaker is so helpful and the kind of stuff that Duncan does. What do you actually do in practice? That was the first trend. The second one, which was exciting, is that there's been a market shift in research, Kathleen. Sustainability research is serious, whether in marketing, whether in corporate finance, whether in ethics, it doesn't matter. It has become a very important part of the overall research trajectory of the quality schools that at least are accredited with us. Then a third move was changes in the curricula. This has been dramatic over the last 5 to 6 to 7 years. The old days, when I started to teach ethics many years ago, it's sort of it's an elective for those interested in philosophical questions, that kind of nonsense, taught by somebody who's a little bit crazy. It's now been ethics and sustainability questions are now a serious curriculum issues. The whole idea of the scholarship of teaching and learning is very, very important. And then another trend, the second last trend, is the question of social sustainability. We must not only, and I know none of you do that, think of sustainability merely as an eco category. It also has very much to do with social change, social inclusion. And in the FND, we've included specifically over the last few years, gender parity in higher education. It's no secret that as you go up the ranks of the academy, that the balance in the gender representation, the balance of first peoples, the balance of previously excluded people, the balance of people with different abilities are not well represented. So we really want to push that agenda, and schools have to actually give us the exact number so that we can see the progress over time. And then lastly, Kathleen, the shift that we saw was the question of social impact. Very difficult. I know, Duncan, you've done fantastic work there. The point is, how do you measure research impact? How do you measure curriculum impact? How do you measure your alumni? But we are making some progress, so that has been the trends. I then end to say, what are our challenges, Kathleen? I think our first challenge is to help schools to focus. Sustainability is huge, but you can simply not, as a single business school or a single faculty or university, address 17 SDGs. You'll be dead. You have to make a very wise contextual analysis. What am I good at, and in what way can I best respond to the context where I find myself? I come from South Africa. It's a different place than France, and that again is a different place than China. So that's the first thing. And secondly, I think, just to close, I think we still, in the early stages at least of the EFMD, to get a proper quantitative data. We mix narratives, it's qualitative storage, which is not bad. We like that. But I think we need to move closer and closer to find credible forms of quantitative measurements, which we can then include in a tabular form in the way we would measure research, for instance. I think we're still a bit way off. But we're making good progress, and we're excited that the schools that we now accredit, we know for sure that they have stepped beyond the old kind of paradigm and clearly within the sustainability framework. Thank you very much for that.
Kat, we can't hear you.
Sorry, the host had temporarily did not let me unmute, so thank you to the host. So yes, thank you so much, Piet. I have tons of questions for you as well, but all of this work is really well aligned with the conversations that we've been having at the HESI working group, and follows really well with what Karina was saying with regards to program level certification and impacts, and whether or not we're actually getting that quality graduate and alumni who are making an impact after they graduate. So tons of thoughts, but I'm going to let Duncan also speak to a little bit about this work and the evolution of the THE to integrate more of these concerns and questions that our panelists have raised with regards to the SDG impact rating compared to your regular one, and some of your challenges and how you see this moving forward.
Thank you, host, for letting me unmute myself. So I think there were some brilliant comments made by Karina and Piet there. And I think there is I'm going to start with actually something that Piet raised, which is the idea of, should you actually have a separate ranking or a separate rating around sustainability from your mainstream ones, or should you integrate them? And I think actually that the answer to that depends on what you're trying to do. And I think that actually, if you're talking about accreditation, then you probably want to include that, because accreditation is about achieving at least a minimal level of quality across everything. Whereas, of course, rankings aren't. Rankings are an ordered list, and there are strengths and weaknesses of both approaches. What I love about accreditation is it does set basic standards. But what it doesn't do, unless the accreditors keep updating the level you need to reach, is inspire people to do more year on year, whereas a ranking absolutely does, because just because you came top last year doesn't mean you'll come top this year, because other people will do more. So there are two very different things. And in our case, we believe that actually, at the moment, it's best to have a separate ranking around sustainability and the Sustainable Development Goals from our mainstream rankings. Now, one of the reasons is also because our mainstream ranking is focused on research-intensive universities. And it won't surprise you if you look at the top of that ranking, it's the same 10 universities you will see at the top of other people's rankings as well. But that reflects largely history and money. And if we're thinking about sustainability, why would we expect those same universities to do well? In fact, actually, it would be quite disappointing if it would be quite good. I would love Harvard to spend their $57 billion endowment on sustainability. That would be absolutely brilliant. But they're not going to. At least I suspect they're not. And if there is anyone from Harvard on this call, please spend that money on and doing sustainability stuff. So because of that, we have criteria about how universities get into that ranking. Now, with the impact rankings, we want every university in the world to be able to participate. We currently have 1,500. Okay, that's still got a long way to go, but it does mean that Global South universities can perform very strongly indeed, far more strongly than they do in more traditional rankings, and that is something that's critical. How could we be measuring sustainability if actually all we were doing was promoting the usual suspects? That would seem to be a challenge to this idea that, again, Piet, you mentioned this idea of equity that springs throughout sustainability. And the challenges we've had, actually, I'm going to go back to the SDGs themselves. The SDGs are wonderful. They're broad. That's really important. But they're not written for higher education. I keep saying there's one mention of universities in the SDG documentation. I'm waiting for someone to point out a second one. It's going to happen one of these days because I haven't read it all exhaustively. But fundamentally, they're not written for universities. We had to build up our own theory of change to allow us to interpret or to try and interpret what was in the SDGs into things that might make sense for higher education. And that is really challenging. And as I said earlier, in some cases, we haven't got that absolutely right. It's very difficult to understand how a university can implement the World Health Organization framework on tobacco control, which is actually one of the targets in SDG 3. It's probably outside the scope of any individual university. We had to try and interpret, well, what could universities do around tobacco control? And we decided that actually they could have non-smoking campuses. So it's a much crude simplification, but that's the kind of decision we've had to make. Now, in the future, I think that the areas that need more work, which is why I'm so delighted with what Sulitest and Belleduc are doing, is trying to understand. I'll step back a little bit. The theory of change we have has 4 elements. We have research. Obviously, the research that your university does can help deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals. We have stewardship, how you look after your resources, both human and physical resources. Again, a clear part of the Green Agenda. We have outreach, the work you're doing in your community and with your community. But then we have teaching, and that's one of the hardest things to assess. And that's why I'm delighted with what Sulitest are doing, what Belleduc are doing. And I do think, though, that there are things that governments need to step up and do, because governments at the moment, when they think about outcomes for their students, tend to focus on financial outcomes. And that's fine, but it's limiting. We need to know about sustainability outcomes of students, not just in the 6 months after they leave university, but 5 or 10 years later. And I'm going to briefly criticize business schools here. Business schools have been teaching ethics for years. And I'm sure they've been teaching it really well. But if you look at the ethical decisions made by business leaders, there's not a lot of evidence that that sticks. And we need sustainability to stick. So we need to be able to measure that far enough out that we can validate that what we're teaching students is sticking and making a change in the world. With that, I'll hand back to Kathleen. And sorry, Piet, about that last bit.
Thank you so much, Duncan, for your enthusiasm. And I'm sure that, people's contributions to the HESI Roundtable's new working group on outcomes, and, having done a materiality assessment, what are the outcomes that we're actually looking for with regards to our students and our institutions? So really looking forward to that conversation, and, I invite our other panelists, if you're interested in joining that conversation, to definitely get in touch. But speaking of outcomes and coming back to, whether or not we are graduating students who are able to affect change, I want to turn it over to Gérald to speak a little bit about the work of the Sulitest Task Force. Why did we go with the task force model? Why we decided to go with sustainability knowledge of our students, some of the things that you have experienced as part of the task force challenges, and how you see them moving forward. Gérald.
Thank you, Kathleen. Duncan has prepared the floor for me. Thank you, Duncan, because it's working a certificate on a sustainability implies to embrace something which is a very wide synoptic view of the question. We cannot start with something and not touch something else. And the important point for our task force in the Sulitest is to keep in mind that the final target for us and for the certificate is the student, but not some student, but any student. Any student, even if it is in this or that domain, even if knows something on one domain, nothing on another. The Sulitest wants to give the certificate to any student, which raises many questions on the fact that we have a very broad knowledge to acquire. The priority has then been put on the knowledge on sustainability, but not only sustainability and all the dependencies, because sustainability is something which is a very complex questions. The notions are very interdependent. And if you want to build up skills, before building skills, you must have some sound knowledge of the situation. It's not possible to build knowledge or to build a mindset without knowing what are really the things that are there. From science, from sociology, from any point of view, you must get some knowledge. That's why I think the first step for the Sulitest is dealing with the knowledge. Uh, the, the work of the task force is organized around three directions. One direction is the knowledge, second one is the skills, and the third one is the mindset. With those three directions, we think that we are tackling the whole question. We think that if we can transmit, assess, and get students that have acquired enough knowledge, skills, and mindset, they will be responsible citizens, and they will be able to transmit values and to transmit all those things to the rest of the society. And it's very important that any student will act in its own domain. That was said, I think, by Pete, and it's very important. I agree to that point that a student, even if he learns poetry, if he learns sociology, he must be able to talk of sustainability. Uh, the choice to start with knowledge is also something which is convenient, because universities traditionally are very used to assess the knowledge. And then I think the first step would be easy if we start through knowledge. Assessing skills or mindset is something more complicated, and I think it will need some work together with all the stakeholders, because you cannot assess something if you haven't if you do not know how the thing was taught. If for example, if we try to have some kind of systemic knowledge, how do you assess a systemic knowledge? Look for the research papers, and there are very few things on the topic. And it is complicated, because if you tackle sustainability, there is something which is really systemic, and you need to have this knowledge. Uh, the Sully test may also be interesting for employers. The first step could be interesting for employers, because sometimes, maybe often, employers want to tailor the skills of the students they recruit just to fit their needs. And it's better probably for them to be sure that the knowledge is good, and then the skills will come later, and they are free to build up the skills on the way they need for their companies. And finally, for the society, it's important to bring up the average level of knowledge. And if all our students get the Sully test and we can assess that they have this knowledge, the knowledge will be shared by the society. I think that's why the Sully test, we in the Sully test started to the knowledge and agreed to start with the knowledge. Do you want something more on the working of the task force, or we keep it for another question later?
Well, I'm getting the warning from Estella that it's time to wrap up. And much as I would love to continue this conversation, I think we're going to have to put a bookmark on that and have conversations moving forward. So thank you to all of our panelists. And I hope to be able to exchange with you on these topics moving forward, because I think there's a lot of room for us to complement and collaborate with each other. Thank you. Back to Estella.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for all of your contributions. I feel this has been a wonderful, almost like a masterclass on assessment and the power that it has to be steering education. I'd like now to introduce our second roundtable, moving from brilliant actions to deep DNA transformation. To moderate this roundtable, I'd like to invite John North. John, who has been a member of the Sulitest Senior Advisory Board since the beginning of the Sulitest journey, and we're very grateful for that. He also works as the executive director at Globally Responsible Leadership Initiative, or GRLI. So John, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Estella, and thank you to you and the team, JC, for the opportunity to participate. We are very fortunate to have a panel of experienced change makers that are joining me here. And some of them I know personally through the work of GRI. So we're going to be learning from their experience and insight, and I'm also going to ask them to listen to each other and perhaps, time permitting, reflect on any new insights that they gather from each other. I'm just going to ask Jacqueline just to also put her video on so that we can have you on the screen. There you go. Wonderful. So I will introduce them individually when I turn to them with some questions in a moment. But they are Valerie Fernandez, Jacqueline Rosebrook, Carol Parks, and Laurent Audin. So at the GRI, which I work with, it's an initiative co-founded by EFMD and Global Compact, now also in strategic partnership with AACSB and Oikos. We understand this term global responsibility as integrative responsibility to the self or the individual, to the other or the collective, and then to the whole. In other words, the system, the systemic level, which of course includes environment, issues of environmental and social justice. So those three levels, I, we, and all of us. And I'd like to believe that that type of responsibility is inherent or part of human nature. In other words, that we are naturally collaborative and supportive, even across political and social divides. However, that part of our DNA is not necessarily always awake or prominent or activated. Some even argue that the industrial age model of education that we still sometimes stuck with even works to suppress that global responsibility gene that is inherent in our DNA. So therefore we need to educate, or more broadly speaking, to develop for global responsibility. So when Estella and JC came to me to say, let's talk about embedding this in the DNA of universities, to embed education for sustainable development in the DNA of universities, and to prove that it's happening, I immediately thought of this global responsibility gene. So I thought I would just briefly give that bit of context. Now, just very briefly about the GLI, we place a particular emphasis on the role of innovative pedagogical approaches such as collaborative inquiry, such as whole person learning. And we're a very small but very active global partnership. We've played a catalyst role over the last 2 decades in the founding and development of several initiatives, including playing a hosting or catalyzing role of Sulitest, Aim to Flourish, the Principles for Responsible Management Education, the 50+20 vision of management education that strives to be the best for the world, that was published in 2012 and has been a key reference point for subsequent updates to EQUIS, which was mentioned earlier, and later the AACSB standards. And currently one of our main vehicles for creating change is our Deans and Directors cohort, which gathers again in Antwerp at the Antwerp Management School in September to continue their work with peer-based learning and to advance shared actions for impact. Now, that's enough about me and the GLI. Turning then to our first panelist, I'm going to ask Valerie Fernandez, who's the Dean of Faculty at Excelia. Valerie, welcome. Your organization was one of the early adopters. It's also, 20 years now, by implementing programs that are dedicated to environmental management, and that later became focused on CSR. Little by little, what was in one program then spread more widely within your school. And one of the 4 strategic axes that is mentioned is that you wish to assert your CSR and sustainable development positioning. So I wanted to start by asking you to tell us a bit more about where you are in this journey and what is the impact that you've seen as a result of Excelia's initiatives in this space.
Thanks. Many thanks, John. And good afternoon and good evening to everyone. It depends on which side of the Atlantic we are. Since the last few years at Excelia, 4 powerful levers have been used for having a systemic approach, and they have equal importance and can be measured. As it has been said before, measure is something which is very important. What can be measured does not exist. Okay, so 4 powerful levers. The first one, curriculum design. The second one, the faculty training. The third one, research. And the last one, pedagogical experiences. So I'm going to give you a few insights on these 4 levers. So the first one, curriculum design of each program of the business school. We've got 4 main programs. We have decided that each fundamental courses in management, it can be finance, marketing, HRM, supply chain, whatsoever, should include at least 1 dimension of CSR, alongside, of course, with specific courses dedicated to CSR. CSR is now embedded in all our programs. How do we measure that? Through our competency goal 5, ethics and CSR. And at the moment, we've got 27% of our teaching hours which address a specific issue in the field of CSR. And tomorrow, or in a few weeks, and yet we begin, each course will have to address a specific SDG by specifying explicitly the impact in each course. And we also introduced some teaching hours dedicated to scientific input on climate change, which are done by specialists. Second lever, the research. So CSR at Excelia is a major research axis. At the moment, 40% of our ranked publications are in the field of CSR. 90% of our intellectual contributions at least targets 1 sustainable development goal. I can also say that we've got an Institute of Social Responsibility through Innovation, in which we are conducting specific research contracts with companies. Third lever, experiential pedagogy. It's really important to Excelia, experiential pedagogy. We've got 2 main experiences for our students, which are compulsory for them to be graduated. The first one is Humacité. Humacité is a humanitarian mission launched 15 years ago worldwide. Yet we have undertaken 7,000 missions, and we've got more than 300 partners, mainly NGOs. We've got a second experiential pedagogy for our students, which is Climacité. Climacité is a sustainable development mission, which has been launched in 2020, alongside with our new strategic plan. Yet we have done, our students have done 650 missions, and they are engaged in ecologic transition in one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals to try to limit carbon footprint of the mission, of course. And for these 2 Humacité and Climacité experiences, we have set up this year a survey to measure the evolution of the soft skills of our students after these experiences. And adaptability, listening, empathy, and autonomy were the ones the most positively impacted by these 2 experiences. And last lever, training of the faculty. Without the faculty, we can't do anything, of course. And it has been said before, how could we measure the fact of spreading CSR in all the curriculum of the programs? So we have trained in April and last May, 40 faculty members to the sustainability mindset, which is an original approach and tool developed by an American researcher, who is called Isabel Rimanocci. She is a member of PRME, and she is also the creator of PRME Sustainability Mindset Workshop. And for us, the aim was to sustain our objective of spreading CSR in all our courses, even if the faculty is not a specialist in the field. It is really important to do that. And just to finish, if you allow me, John, Excelia yet offers to all the learners of Excelia the awareness test from Sulitest to measure the knowledge of our students. So we measure the gap between the results of the first test when they integrate the school and the last test in their final year. And since 2021, as we are now a stakeholder of Sulitest Impact, we have decided to go further. And next year, we are going to ask our students in the final year, so 1,500 students, to do the Sulitest certificate.
Wonderful. Valerie, thank you so much for sharing that. And it is quite inspiring to hear what I would term whole system transformation when you're looking across curriculum, research, the experiential pedagogy, as well as the development of faculty. We might come back to talk a bit more about innovations in the pedagogical space. Turning to Jacqueline. Jacqueline, it's wonderful to see you again. Jacqueline is Director of Sustainable Development at Grenoble École de Management for a number of years now. And recently, quite excitingly, your school became one of the first business schools in France to be recognized as a mission-based company, a type of social business, alongside, I think, 150 other companies and organizations. I would love to hear, in your view, what led the school to this point, to this decision, and what are your expectations as a result of becoming a mission-based business school?
Hello, John. Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to talk about this today. Let me just start with a little rectification. You said we've been recognized as a social business school or a social business enterprise. It's not a recognition. It's actually a legal commitment that we make in our legal status of our companies or our schools formation. We have to declare it on our legal status, and so it's a huge commitment, and it's a huge means, a strategic tool to make us even more accountable for these issues. And it allows us also to be much more, even though every company and every business school is mission driven, especially ones who have accreditation. This is all something we've been talking about for years. But with mission, so I'm having a little bit of issue transforming this word social mission schools, I guess, but they're not just social, they can also be and should be environmentally driven. You have a raison d'être, so you have a mission driven statement that you have to build collectively, internally. And after that, you identify strategic objectives that term. So what I want to say about this transformation and this new integration and legal commitment we've made as a school is kind of an exciting move to transform the culture of the school and really embed these topics and what our mission long-term is. So for GEM, for example, our mission-driven statement, our raison d'être, is to provide responses through training and research to the major challenges of ecological, societal, and economic transitions, and to contribute to a more resilient, fair, and more peaceful, responsible world. So after that, we identify 5 strategic objectives. They can be, each company or each school can identify the ones that they want to embed in their strategy. And what one of the previous speakers was talking about, you can't address all of the questions and all the SDGs, but you should identify what your expertise is already within your own school. And that's what we did when we identified our 5 strategic objectives. And what we also did, because this is a typically French status that is not really easily translatable to other countries and other legal frameworks, I think is exciting and innovative about this lever that we have chosen to adopt and experiment with, because it is something that is much more, how do I put this? We're actually controlled biannually with outside organizations that come in and audit around the alignment and the progress we are making toward these strategic objectives. So this is hopefully over the long term going to allow us to we have to identify clearer indicators that are going to drive this change. It will also help the school shift toward financial accountability to a triple bottom line accountability. This also helps us embed it in our processes. And I think it's a wonderful way to transform the culture of the school. We talk a lot about, DNA, but I think this is really a cultural shift that we have to adopt and really make sure that it's something that can't be changed from one direction to the next. If you have a new director who comes in, this is long-term strategy being fully adopted by a company or a school. So this is an interesting tool for us to see how we can really get these topics fully embedded, develop indicators, long-term indicators for driving change in these topics, and also translate what we're doing with the correlation with some of the several SDGs that we have identified also that are linked to our 5 strategic objectives. And you asked how this has transformed the school. Well, actually, it's just part of the progression because we've already been working with a lot of assessment tools and a lot of strategic tools to help us drive this change. We've mentioned Equus, but there's also the sustainability label in France that we've been using since 2011. And they have also allowed us to develop indicators and strategic indicators that help us report and show to all of our stakeholders what we're actually doing in this area. So what else would I like to add to that? I think that the message is how do we get our schools to really transform from within, but also clearly identify the indicators for assessment in the long term that will allow us to communicate this and really assess something that is at the core of our activity and not just something that's nice to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. Fascinating. And also, I guess for those of you familiar with some of the alternative legal formations that are emerging also in the company space, it's certainly time for us to start experimenting and be courageous enough to actually bake into the actual legal framework and founding of, or as you said, then the raison d'etre of the organization, some of these issues and commitments, so that it's not just a matter of window dressing, but of complete commitment. I'm turning to Carol Parks. Carol, at the University of Winchester, where, of course, you're a professor emeritus in responsible management and leadership. You've been a prominent and long-standing activist, I think, in the responsible management education arena, recognized a number of times in the UK and internationally for your work in the development of networks such as the PRME. But of course, within your university, you have succeeded in doing some really interesting work on the integration of the SDGs into research and pedagogy. Can you perhaps tell us a little bit more about how this started and what it entails? It'd be wonderful to hear from you.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you to the others for their really interesting insights into the work they're doing. I was reflecting in preparation for this that next year will be 20 years since I set up a core module on the MBA Aston University Business School in the UK. Not without a fight, I have to say, at the time, which 2003 was quite an early time for that, but it was very clear from the outset, just as in my later work, that it had to be interdisciplinary. It had to have a systems thinking approach and had to be really part of a holistic experience for the students. So it was very much reflective. And that led to work that I did across the whole university on the interdisciplinary front of having audits on the curriculum, first in the business school, on where social responsibility, ethics and sustainability existed there, in order to set up the the goal was to actually have, for the strategy of the university, social responsibility, sustainability literate graduates. And therefore we had to understand where this occurred in the programme at the outset. So we did it first in the business school, then across all the faculties. And that led to changes in teaching policy and the way that was done. And then when I joined Winchester, which was about 5 years ago, it was just around the time of the SDGs, no, 7 years ago now, yeah, actually. And therefore we were in a different position, but the Vice-Chancellor was very keen to have the whole strategy of the university around the SDGs. And so I worked with her to do an audit of the curriculum there, but this was student-led. So we worked with the NUS, the National Union of Students in the UK, and their Students Organising for Sustainability organisation, to run Responsible Futures. And the audit, we developed the methodology around the SDGs, but we trained students, volunteers. Pizza lunches were great at getting them to attend training sessions, and then they audited 1,500 modules across the university in all subjects to find out the same question that was working with when I was at Aston, which was, you know, where does this occur in the curriculum, in the formal curriculum? And then we came up with reports for each of the subject areas to where the specific areas of the SDGs occurred in their curriculum. But we were also concerned not just with the formal curriculum, but the informal curriculum around community and on-campus work, as well as the subliminal curriculum. And what was the organisation doing about adhering to policies on the SDG? So not just in curriculum, but also in things like recruitment at the university. Policies on fossil fuels is a straightforward one, I think, although not for some universities, but also about training and induction with all faculty, so that it was an important part of what they're doing. And the audits led to policy changes in teaching, so that SDGs became a core area for all students, linked to their discipline, so that the academics were invited to, demonstrate how they were incorporating the SDGs within the curriculum. But I said this is, again, holistic, trying to look at the whole person, having a systems approach and looking at the connectivity between one aspect and another, the complexity that's involved. And then above all, with all the work that we do, we look at encouraging students skills of advocacy and action, and being influential, and understanding their own sphere of influence, of how they can change things wherever they are in whatever situation. And at Winchester, we followed up work on an alumni survey going back 15 years because there'd been a sustainability and responsibility agenda and social justice at Winchester for generations, really. And what we were not just interested in career jobs as they are narrowly defined, but we were interested in what they did with their whole life. So how did they demonstrate advocacy and influence beyond, their duties in their workplace, and how did they champion it within their workplace, but also within their communities and within other aspects of their work. So, and one of the things that we did to encourage a broader look at sustainability beyond their subject was to use the Sulitest. And we had that not only in programs and used as assessment in some modules, but we got agreement to have all new students joining the university would have the opportunity to undertake sustainability literacy test, Sulitest. So that was again part of the subliminal curriculum. Before they join, they're having messages about what the university stands for and what's important. But the great thing about the Sulitest was that it introduced questions that were beyond the subject areas that the students were going to be studying, because we all have our preferences. I was hearing about, teaching ethics, and that was my kind of starting point in a way. But it's important that we understand the questions we wouldn't ask. And that's one way to bring that into the curriculum, questions I wouldn't have posed to some of the students. Is that okay?
Yes, that's wonderful. Thank you, Carol. And it's always inspiring to hear about the extent of embeddedness at Winchester. In fact, I know that I did introduce you as somewhat of an activist, and I know, for instance, that at one point a large number of the faculty at your institution aligned strongly with some of the activist movements, such as Extinction Rebellion.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. We actually had a march of faculty for climate, on, in support of the student marches as well. And our Vice Chancellor at the time actually became member of the local branch of Extinction Rebellion and encouraged us all to be part of that. So it's, but also just looking for opportunities to see where you can make a difference. And students are often eager to do that. We had so many societies and clubs, hedgehog protection, swifts, birds protection, not ecology, gardening, all kinds of things that were grown out of their kind of interest in nature and the planet.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. So turning to Laurent, you've been waiting patiently, but I'm looking forward to asking you. Now, firstly, I must say this, I don't know you personally, but I have highlighted the importance of whole person learning. So when I introduce you, I said, let's ask you a question that maybe kicks off and gives us a glimpse of you as a whole person, right? Now, I know that you are a professor in nuclear physics at Paris-Saclay University, and you're also a project manager for sustainable development in the institution. But my opening question for you is, what is keeping you awake at night at the moment, or perhaps motivating you to get up in the morning as a sustainability lead at a leading French institution? And then we can get to some of the other detail.
Yeah, thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Well, trivially, I would say that my 2-year-old daughter is doing a very good job at keeping me awake. But beside that, it's not just cracking a joke, because I actually think that every day that passes without measures and decisions towards sustainability is actually a day that makes her future grimmer, sort of. So, and this change that we need, and maybe that will also tell you something about me, I think it can only happen through a common general transition within the society. So we need people to think, to act, to buy, to vote for the climate, for the environment, for social justice. I cannot help to emphasize enough how much those questions are entangled with another. There is no protection of the planet if the poor remain too poor and cannot care for the planet themselves. And so this change can only happen if sustainability is part of the inner culture of each and everyone. That's our responsibility, I think, as academics, to give our students the best knowledge of the situation, the best understanding of what's at stake. So setting up the right tools, passing the right message, that's, I guess, reason enough to wake up in the morning. And what would conversely keep me awake at night? Well, so there is a question, inherent question about the nature of our university, because Paris-Saclay is very large, very focused toward basic research. So sometimes it's a bit hard to make the connection between the very, again, basic science that is developed at the university and the outcome. It can seem a bit far, a bit detached. Actually, I think it's not really, and even if it's not for the output, it's in the way that we are performing this research and that we can get some connection. But it's also a specific site with lots of greens. Part of the campus is within the forest, another part is adjacent to cultivated fields. So how do we manage, how do we react to this environment? How do we preserve it? How do we integrate with the local communities? Those are also sometimes perturbating and deep questions, because I don't think we are still doing everything right, but clearly we are working on it. If I could set a few examples of things that
please go ahead.
how to say, I invest time at the moment. Well, there is one thing we are quite proud at the university, actually. There is a general course on ecological transition, and the specificity is that it's a unique course delivered to absolutely all students during the second year. So somehow we are a bit ahead of a large report that has been published very recently, handed to the French higher education minister, the Jouzel report. Jean Jouzel is the famous name of the IPCC. So he has worked about the missions of higher education in terms of climate change and social and ecological transition. And that was one of the key measures, the requirement to get the same culture to all our students, every one of them, whatever the learning program is. So this is already in place. Of course, it's getting improved every year, but we have this at Paris Saclay. I should also mention a draft of a very general action plan that we have at the university level. The idea is to implement as quickly as we can the Grenoble Agreement. This is a large document that has been signed by tens, maybe more than 100 now, French higher education institutions. And the plan encompasses more than 200 lines of action, and it's tackling both research, teaching, what a green campus should be, but also the question of diversity, inclusion, students' situation. So it's very wide because, again, we want to tackle the question of sustainability in all its aspects, not just about environment. And of course, there is the implementation of Sulitest that is also very interesting for us. And this hopefully should be proposed to all our students, but next year, end of next year, last limit. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And we are coming up to the closing part of this panel. So maybe I'm just going to circle back and ask each of the panelists if you could recommend one key action or one key lever that the higher education ecosystem needs to place pressure or put effort into in order to ensure that this DNA is active when it comes to educating for sustainable development. What would that be? So maybe, Valerie, if I can ask you, what's the one thing that you would most like to see your colleagues in other institutions and in other networks do in order to promote this?
Well, to my opinion, to make companies really conscious about the importance of integrating in their management and in their decisions really sustainable development and the SDGs, because nowadays our students, I mean, they have to have hope, and we're training them to be change leaders tomorrow. And when they get into companies, they've got to have open-minded people in front of them.
Great. Yeah, wonderful. Thanks. Jacqueline.
Well, I completely agree with Valérie, and in the sense that I think that the most important lever is for us to facilitate and let the students drive this change. I think that the changes I've seen over the past few years have been the students' voices that are finally being heard, and how that translates into pressure on the companies to be looking for students with the kind of training that we are providing them, and that we're hopefully transforming them with the new curriculums that we're putting into place, but to make business as usual understand that students really want to contribute to the transformation of the business world today and the way we do work.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jacqueline. Carol, any thoughts from your side? Closing thoughts from your side?
Yeah, I totally agree with the student-led, because the students I always felt were ahead of the game, you know, in terms of their thinking and their wanting to move on this. But I also think that there's an important part that strategy in universities and how that's influenced maybe externally, and it may be different in different contexts in different places in the world, because once it's within the strategy, I mean, you can change strategy, but it has a more powerful lever for the faculties, the subject areas, the deans to be more, and also to be interdisciplinary, which is key, because there's a problem of having isolated courses or just the champions doing this. And the other issue, and why I'm talking about strategy and maybe external pressure for it to be part of the strategy of the universities, is that there's a change of leadership and they have a different take on, you know, what they want to see the strategy as. You know, there's a current flavour of employability, but narrowly defined in terms of graduate career jobs. And that's kind of, you know, a total opposite in many ways, you know, to some of the things that students are wanting to do or hoping to do. And so, you know, how do you overcome that sort of quick change from one leader to the next, and how do you sustain that within the organization? I think higher education has to have a much broader kind of lever that helps to sustain that beyond you know, the current leadership.
Yeah, absolutely agree. It's about sustaining the change, right? And sustaining the change leaders as well, which by the way is one of the things that we focus on at the Dean's Cohort, is to ensure that you have that support. And then last word, Laurent, from your side, any final thought just in terms of a key lever or action, and perhaps you want to touch just on something that you've experienced also at Paris-Saclay?
Well, it's hard to choose one, but I guess maybe conversely a little bit to Carol and Jacqueline, even though I completely agree with their reasoning. But I think I cannot underline enough the importance of committed leadership in these questions, because it's a rough change that we are trying to perform. It's a deep change. And so it's very important that the leadership helps everybody to talk to one another. For example, in disciplinary fields, there are a lot of rivalry. Things are always complicated. The faculties do not necessarily agree with one another and so on. So bringing everyone around the table, explaining what is the goal, that the goal can be shared, that it's not about one field extending wings over another one. This is very important. And I think we have been quite lucky at Paris-Saclay, because Sylvie Rotaillot, our former president of the university, she has been now named as a minister, but she really understood this, and she made it so that it could happen and the change could start. So you need, of course, action from the feet, but you know, a staying body, you are to walk, you need your feet, which are somehow the students, but you also need the head, and everybody has to work together in the same direction. And one thing I'd like to mention, because it's a strong experience, it's how the students had a hard time through the pandemics in isolation. And I remember for many years, we talked about virtual courses and what's not. And actually, these are very useful tools, but that cannot replace direct experience. We need to make link people talking together. It was very hard for them. So yes, we still need amphitheater, workrooms, libraries, cafes. They will not be replaced by computers, even though the carbon emission will be a bit lower if we go all online.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Laurent. And thank you again, Jacqueline, Valerie, Carol, and Laurent for joining me. And I'm going to hand back to Estella.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you to all the panelists for this advice-packed and very insightful and impactful conversation. I'll pass the ball now to Aurélia Descamps, co-founder of the Sulitest movement, for our very special announcement. Aurélia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Estella. Let me first share my screen. And I hope you can hear me well. Okay, it should be good now. So let me first express a big thank you to our panelists and our moderators for a truly inspiring, challenging, but also interesting discussion in order to raise the ambition of transforming higher education towards sustainability. With Sulitest, we launched an international movement 9 years ago now, with a set of engagement tools to raise and map sustainability literacy worldwide. For us, sustainability literacy means knowledge, skills, and mindset. Some of the panelists have expressed that in the session. In this journey, we started with knowledge by developing impactful tools to improve knowledge and awareness as a lever for engagement toward developing skills and mindset for sustainability. We know that knowledge is not enough, but we are deeply convinced that mainstreaming sustainability knowledge beyond experts and advocates is a way to build this common language, this inner culture that Laurent mentioned in the panel, that is absolutely crucial in order to make sure that any current or future decision maker are able to make decisions toward a sustainable future. For years, we have been dreaming of resetting the standard with a certification tool to really mainstream sustainability knowledge. In 2022, at Sulitest, we gathered a team with academics, practitioners, experts on sustainability to build a robust assessment tool and an assembly of fellows which are representative of our main stakeholders, from academics to corporates, from students to accreditation and ranking, from institution to civil society and NGO, to help us in building the most relevant tool possible. We are really proud and really happy to announce today that TASK, the assessment of sustainability knowledge, will be released next academic year with a pilot for fall 2022 and the first certificate issued early 2023. TASK will allow us to make sustainability knowledge mainstream by providing a robust, relevant, and comparable certification tool. It will also help us to create and develop the task force that the world needs. We are so happy that at the moment, higher education institutions, like the ones which were representative in the panel previously, and many others, are currently engaging to act as change leaders by distributing tasks not only to specialized programs, but rather to a majority of their graduates across all programs in order to mainstream sustainability knowledge. Of course, we know that knowledge won't be enough. However, we are convinced that building this common language, this collective understanding of sustainability, is a crucial piece in order to trigger systemic change. So please reach out to us and join the movement to build a sustainable future together. Thank you very much. And with that, I'm passing the ball back to you, Estela.
Thank you so much, Aurelia. We're so excited to be part of this beautiful education sustainability movement. And just a few last words before we close, I'd like to let you know that our latest report, Raising and Mapping Awareness of the Global Goals, is now live on the link on the screen. That's where we share a little bit more about the Sulitest movement and what has happened in the last 12 months, as well as data that has emerged from the current use of our tools. It's time we scale up our impact. It's time we scale up action. It's time universities have that deep DNA transformation to embed sustainability into higher education, to have that long-term positive impact, that sustainability imprint that Duncan referred to before. We need to mainstream sustainability. We need all of us to be speaking the language of sustainable development. And I personally deeply believe that this assessment can be a big driver of this change. As Aurelia said, as every change needs a change leader, I call you to be one, and I invite you to get in touch with us to see how we can work together on that. Let's build a future together, and thank you for sharing your time with us today.